Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. A while ago I picked up this clipper belt lacer at a local auction. Both of my South Bend lathes use a flat leather belt to drive the spindle that is laced together with lacing that's installed with this machine or one like it. Clipper made several different versions of these in different sizes. This is a 6-inch model, and it has certainly seen some better days. It's pretty dirty, covered with oil and goop. So I want to tear it down, give it a good clean paint job, and put it back together. I think I'm going to be replacing the belt on the 1960 South Bend that I have, and I have a feeling it won't be my last belt-driven machine, so having a lacer like this will certainly come in handy. I couldn't find a parts diagram or anything for this machine anywhere, so I don't know the real names of many of the parts, so I'm just going to make them up. But for the ones that I do know, I'll try to use them. Well, the first thing I need to do is take off these two handles. Looks like they were held on with some socket head cap screws, which I'm sure were not original to this. Well, the knobs on the end of the handles don't match, so they may have come from two different machines. This one is broken. It looks like it's been cracked completely in half and is being held together with the remnants of this packing tape. And I'm pretty sure there's supposed to be some metal caps on the top of these, similar to what's on the bottom of the wooden part, but those top ones are long gone. It looks like the two halves of these are held together with a large pin, and I'll just use a brass drift and a hammer and pop that out, and it should take apart the upper jaw from the lower jaw. Now these two little hinged pieces are, I think, the main component of the lacer, and they're hinged together with a couple of pins on each side. With those pins removed, I should be able to take off this top section. On the front of the lacer, there's this hoop that is also hinged. I'm not exactly sure what this is for and why it would hinge down, but it's got a couple of screws on each side which act as the hinge pins, and removing those, it'll come right off. There's this spring clip on the front of it, and I could never figure out what this is supposed to be for. Well, if I turn this over, there's some screws that hold a block to the main casting, and attached to that piece is the lower half of those hinged comb-like features that hold the hooks in place. I think it'll make sense once this thing's back together, but there's a couple of screws now that hold that comb piece to this block. I can take that apart now. On the back of this thing, there's a pivoting piece that's called a dog. It's part of the ratcheting mechanism that I need to take this pin out in order to remove it, but it's being a bit stubborn. And here's where I noticed why it wasn't coming off. At the end of these pins, there's a groove machined in them, and there's this little tiny spring clip that retains that pin. Unfortunately, they're not all present, so I might have to see what I can do to find some suitable replacements. But once I took that spring clip off, the pin was able to be driven out. The top half of this thing is a little more complicated than the bottom. The first thing I'm going to take off here is the ratchet, the counterpart to the dog that I took off. Again, this pin was held in with these small spring clips, but not every one of these pins had it. This one happens to have them on both ends, so that's good. So these handles pivot on a pin. Again, the spring clips on this one were missing, and it came out with almost no effort whatsoever. It's in pretty good shape. It's just missing the little retaining clips. There are two other pins, it looks like, that are in this side of the casting. This one that's furthest inboard popped right out. Looks like both of the retaining springs were missing on that one. They are different sizes, so they shouldn't be too hard to mix up. I need to make sure I pay attention to that. Well, with that pin out, this whole assembly comes out of this side of the casting, and it looks like it's a couple of cast pieces, and then there's a couple of, looks like, plate cut out, little brackets, and then there's a wheel, a roller wheel, that's captured in between them. And it looks like the way this operates is as you pull the handle down, this sort of link articulates and pushes that wheel down onto another component of the lacer. There looks like there's a couple of shafts here that hold these pieces together that the wheel rides on, and that those brackets attached to. Doesn't look too complicated. The other side comes apart in the same way and just as easy. I just want to take some special care paying attention to how I'm taking this apart, how this comes out, so I'll understand how I need to put it back together without, like I said, without any kind of a diagram. It's kind of difficult. I'm going by basically this video. I'll watch this video back when I get ready to reassemble it, and it'll be my guide. Well, there's a screw here on the front that I don't have any idea what it's for, but it looks like it's removable, so I might as well remove it. Okay, so it looks like that screw was retaining the top of this spring. Now I see there's a plug on the top of this thing, and that must be how you grab on the spring to pull it into tension to screw in that pin to retain it in that upper hook. So that makes a little more sense of how that goes back together. There are two other pins on each side of this upper casting that I'm not sure exactly what their purpose is, but I don't really see an advantage of taking them apart because there's nothing that they're holding in. I think they're part of the mechanism involved with the handles. So I think I'm just going to leave those alone. There's a little eyelet, I guess you'd call it, that's screwed into this piece that the spring attaches to on this part of the upper jaw. And it looks like these two side brackets are just attached with a couple of screws to this center section. There's these two pieces here that I believe those wheels that were attached to the handle right in, and they're sort of like hinged to this center section. And from what I can tell, it looks like they are pinned in. They're not attached with screws. They're pinned in, and they're blind pins. So I don't see that there's going to be a reasonable way for me to remove them. So I'm going to leave this assembled as it is and just clean it up. Each of these side pieces has a spring-loaded plunger down in them, and looks like they're attached with some kind of a split spanner nut. I'm not sure if I'm going to remove these. I may opt to do that later, but I think for now I'm just going to leave them and not worry about it. Well, I think that's as far as I'm going to take the disassembly. I'm going to get these into the parts washer and clean up all of the oil and prime them and give them a paint job. I have everything all finished painted after I cleaned them up and did a little work to the handle knobs. So I can now start putting this back together. Something I didn't capture on video is this little catch for that front hoop thing with the pointy bits on it. There's a plunger that's got a spring behind it and then a handle that screws into the side of it. At first I couldn't figure out how in the heck to take it apart. And then after I had turned the cameras off, I was sitting there staring at it and realized that that handle probably unscrewed, and sure enough it did. I can put this front hoop back on. I gotta make sure I put it on the right way. It's only the left side has the little notch that little catch mechanism grabs a hold of to lock it in its vertical position. Well, now's as good a time as any to put this front spring clip on. I still haven't figured out what this thing's for. If you have any idea what it could be for, drop a comment down below, because I don't have a clue. And I couldn't find any reference to it at all. Reassembling the bottom half of the lacer, these two halves cleaned up really nice. One side looks like brass and the other side is copper. They were so dirty that I couldn't tell that they were two different metals. Next I can reinstall the upper piece of the lacer. At least that's what I'm calling these two together. Although I can't quite remember which way this is supposed to go on. I believe it goes on this way, but I'm not positive. I need to pause here and go back and look at the video just to be sure.
12 seconds later.
Well, here's another case of where making YouTube videos certainly comes in handy, because I was able to go back and look at the original disassembly video to just be 100% sure I knew exactly how this thing was supposed to go back together. I think it would have really only go together one way, but I suppose if you were ambitious enough, you could have forced it, and that's the last thing I would have wanted to do. Well, I can pin this dog back onto the rear of this thing, and I think this is the right way it goes in. This pin at least had the spring clips, so it's nice to have them. I did look around at McMaster, and they do have some, but they don't have any that are this size. So I'm not sure where I could get these little spring retaining clips anywhere. If you happen to have a source, let me know in the comments below. I am going to reassemble this thing without all of the retaining clips, and I think that's okay. But it would certainly be nice to have them. I suppose if I really wanted to, I could remachine these, widen that groove, and use some snap rings. I did end up taking those spring-loaded plungers out just so I could make sure there was no rust or crust inside of there. They came apart pretty easily with just, a screwdriver in half of the slot. They really weren't even in there that tight at all. Well, I need to start putting together the main part of this, but I'm going through another one of those cases where I'm trying to remember, again, just how did this thing go together? and which one of those is the left side and which one's the right side. But I think what I can do is take the centerpiece, which I know goes in the center, and attach that little spring eyelet. It just screws down into the center and has a hole drilled into it for the spring. Well, these three pieces here, the center section and these two side brackets, I think they can only go together one way, maybe two ways, but we'll forget about the second one. And I think I'm pretty safe here to put these together without referring back to my original disassembly video. Well, next I want to put these two halves together here, but that means I'm going to need to figure out how to reattach the upper hook of that spring onto that retaining pin, and it's going to be under tension. Well, I quickly made this tool out of some metal rod, just put a hook on the end of it, and I should be able to reach down through this hole on the top, grab the top of the spring, pull it tight, and then hopefully feed that pin in. So this is going to be a little bit of a dance here to be able to hold on to this piece while pulling the spring, while at the same time dropping in that pin. I don't want to put this into a vise because I just painted it. I don't want to scratch the paint on it. Well, I guess that wasn't too bad. It could have gone a little worse. So I've got the pin in there now, so the challenge is to get the tool back out because it was a pretty tight fit in there. Well, I think I'm ready to put these two pieces together now. I've got the larger of the pins here, and this one didn't have any retainers or even grooves for retainers at all, so it's just a bit of a snug fit. So I'll insert it in here and feed it through the bracket as well as that upper jaw piece. Well, I should be able to put this upper ratchet back onto the top half, but it looks like I put this lower hinged piece on backwards. So I'll need to pull the pin on that and flip it around before I can put the ratchet back onto the top. Well, the next thing here is these handle mechanisms. So there's the two little handle ends what you want to call them. Then there's these two brackets. There's a wheel for each side and a couple of other pieces and a bunch of pins. Now I am going to have to go back and look at the video again just to see how these are supposed to go back together. Well, I think I have a pretty good idea now how this all goes back together. I could sit here and try to explain what it is I'm doing, but since I really don't know what the names of these parts are, and I'm probably going to make a few mistakes along the way, I think I'll just let the video run while I'm putting this back together. Well, besides trying to get this whole mechanism together as it is, I think it was equally as perplexing to try to figure out how I was going to get it back into this upper jaw and get all of the holes aligned for the pins. Well, with that done, second verse is same as the first. It's just a mirror of the left side. Now, this handle on the right, even though it's functioning, it just appears like it's binding up. Like it doesn't want to return to like a neutral position very easily. And I'm not sure exactly what's causing this, so I'm going to take a little bit of time and just see if I can't maybe take it apart again and figure out if I have something misaligned or maybe missed a burr on something that I didn't notice before. But we'll see what we can try to figure out. Now, I didn't remove these two center pins, but this one here on the right doesn't look like it's aligned the same as the one on the left. There's a flat spot milled into one side of that pin, and it looks like it's rotated out of position. When I was getting this cleaned up, it looked to me like these two pins were actually pinned in place themselves. And as I hammer this out, you can probably see that there is a hole that's drilled through the side of this pin with the flat milled on it. So I assume that this thing was disassembled before and that pin never replaced, but it was not aligned with the hole that was in the top of the casting. So I'm just trying to realign it by eye. I'm not going to try to get a pin in there because I think that would be probably a lost cause, considering half of the pin is still in the casting. So I would assume that whoever had this apart before me probably hammered those pins out and broke the retaining pins. So I'm just going to get it aligned by eye and put the handle back together. Well, that didn't solve the problem completely. It still wants to bind up, but I think I'm just going to have to live with it the way it is. Well, for the handles themselves, I just cleaned them up and painted them. And then the knobs, I cleaned them up really good. As you see, they're two different sizes, which is kind of weird. And the smaller one was actually split in half. So I glued it back together and just put a little bit of beeswax as a finish on them. I think the best way to reattach these knobs onto the stems is with some 2-part epoxy. Well, and these socket head cap screws just don't look right for this thing, so I'm going to ditch those and see if I can't find something more suitable. Like many of you, I have a collection of old fasteners, either in coffee cans or jars or these organizing tubs, and I found a couple of nice looking, I think they're stainless steel, they might be stainless steel, flathead screws, and they were the same thread. I think these are 1032. So I'm going to use these instead. I think they look a lot nicer. When I picked this thing up originally from the auction, the nameplate was already off of the machine, but luckily it was still with it. So I got some drive screws from McMaster so I can reattach it to the front. Well, I bought a couple of feet of some belt material and some lacing from McMaster car so we can give this a little bit of a test. Now, unfortunately, it turns out that I bought the wrong kind of hooks here. These are called a unibar lace, and they are not recommended for situations where the pulleys are crowned. And on both of the South Bend lathes, there is a crown to the pulleys. And unfortunately, it was a bit of an expensive mistake because the box of lacing was about $40, and I only need these two little pieces for each belt. So I guess when time comes to make the new belt for the South Bend, I'll just have to bite the bullet and spend a little bit more money for the proper ones. I might be able to get away with using these, but we'll see. Well, with a couple of pieces of lacing now cut to length, I'll take the first section and slide it into the combing, I'm going to call it. I can slide off this cardboard. I don't really need it on there since these are welded. Now, if it wasn't welded, I would need to leave those at least until I put in this pin. This pin holds the lacing in position during the operation. So now I'll get the belt lined up so the lacing is centered on it and pull that upper jaw forward, and I'll crank down on the handles, and as it does, it slowly presses those points into the belt, and I just keep ratcheting it forward until I really can't press on it anymore. That's probably over compressing it, so I'll have to experiment a little bit with how far I really want to go with these. Yeah, I think that last one I didn't really need to go that hard with it, so but once I got it all the way pressed down, I can just pull out the pin and slide out the belt. This end is all laced. And I just repeat that process for the other side. Now, some care needs to be taken when lining up these hooks because they are offset from each other. You kind of want to have one side having a hook in a spot where the other side has a space, and that'll just take a little bit of careful thought. I'm not putting that much thought into this right now. I'm just basically testing this out and seeing how it works. Well, with hooks pressed into both ends now, I can bring them together. I've got some of this material that I also bought from the same source. That is basically the pin that holds these together, and this is ready to go. This is likely the belt material I will end up using on the South Bend. It's a little more modern than just standard leather. It is some kind of a leather material, but there's a piece of polycarbonate down the middle of it, which gives it a lot more stiffness and rigidity. Well, and I think that's about it for this video. I've got this thing together. I'll put it on the shelf because I won't need it for a little while, but I'm certainly glad I was able to go ahead and get this thing all cleaned up and ready to go and test it out before I actually need it. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. If you like to subscribe to see more videos like this, click that subscribe button and that bell icon so you'll know when I publish another video. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.